So I feel like I need to address the elephant in the room.
Is it your son?
As such, I've actually had to prepare a written statement that I need to read. And I take no pleasure in doing this, but in my honest opinion, a line has been crossed. Dear aspiring creator, and creator is in quotes here, we hope this letter finds you knee-deep in PLA filament and not tangled up in your own creations, because it has come to our attention that you have been creating unauthorized 3D printed statues of the Dive Down podcast logo. And while we appreciate your artistic flair in quotes, of course, our lawyers have strongly advised us to send this letter. Please cease and desist from printing our logo immediately. We know the temptation of creating our glorious visage is overwhelming, but we ask you to channel your creative energies into something more original. Perhaps 3D printed replicas of your own work. We look forward to not having to drag you through a lengthy legal process, and we kindly ask that you stick to authorized merch in the future. Or perhaps you can start a 3D printing podcast of your own. Sincerely, the legal department of the Dive Down podcast.
I only have one thing to say to that, Stan, and that is, think good, play bad, my friend. In beautiful 3D matte ivory white PLA for you that I was going to throw in the mail and send to you, but I guess you don't want it. I guess you don't want this great life-size beautiful script sign.
You made my child cry. By ignoring our strongly worded letter.
Steph, I want to know when you wrote that because it's not in the show notes.
When I should have been feeding my child. I was like, sorry, children, you have to wait.
He had that one in the holster for a whole week.
Humor never sleeps.
Dave, can you 3D print neon signs?
No. You can 3D print like LCD signs. You know what I mean? Okay. Or stuff like that. But that's what I'm trying to figure out how to do next. I don't know. I've been told to take this to another space. So I do love that my bit for the pre-roll was to bring up something that I did make that was of our show art. And Stan was like, nope, but I made this for you, Stan. I made this for you.
Hello and welcome to episode 290 of the Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast focused on the latest decks, trends, and strategies for the casual spike and dads who are currently away from their computer because their baby is crying a little bit. So that's why Shane's doing the intro.
He wanted to know why Stan was so mean to me. That's what the baby wanted to know.
He's like, Dad, I can't deal with this negative energy.
Exactly.
My name is Shane here in Denver, Colorado. With me on the line from Massachusetts, it's the one and only Devin O'Donnell, a.k.a. Doomwake. Devin.
That's me. What's up? How you been?
Hello. I'm good, man. I'm good. Tried to go camping this weekend. That's some pre-roll action. Tried to go camping. It was very windy. How's your weekend?
Sounds like it. I didn't do too much. Did a little bit of streaming. This weekend I didn't do streaming. We did NRG coverage. Yes, I'm getting my weekends mixed up. They're just kind of all blurring together. Yeah, Lee, this was the Nadu send-off, and we definitely saw a lot of Nadu over the weekend. Maybe we won't get into that, but yeah, it was a good time. I love doing commentary. Shout out to the NRG folks. They're great. Awesome. Yeah, I watched some of the finals or the semifinals. I had it on briefly, and I couldn't tag you. You weren't in the chat. I couldn't be like, Doomwake, acknowledge me, senpai. If you had just put a message in chat, I would have known it was you.
You watched. Yeah, I always wonder: are the casters watching chat usually?
I have it open.
You just want to see in case something gets mentioned.
Yeah, and a lot of times there's some stuff that they point out that like a play happens that we miss, so it's actually rare. On rare occasions, chat is sometimes correct.
God,
chat's sometimes helpful.
Don't tell them, Devin. They're going to
outside
on rare
assistance.
occasions.
Outside caster assistance. That's also the Godfather Dave Harbarger from Chicago, Illinois.
I'm just recovering from the injunction that I was just served at the beginning of this podcast, so it's fine.
Injunction.
It's fine.
What's your function?
It's going to take you a while.
It's going to take me a while to print out to 3D print my response. Will take a number of hours.
Can you melt that PLA down and reuse it?
No, you can't.
Can you can you turn straw into gold like Rumpelstiltskin?
Actually, you can, but I'm not ready for that level yet. That's like the 12th level of people who are into this whole thing. So, yeah. You know what? I will say one thing about this. Stan is not a fan of my new hobby. However,
really? He really doesn't like it?
I don't know. He gives me a lot of crap about it. However, we have gotten no emails complaining about the little jokes that I've made about my new fun toy. And we have gotten mean notes on, not mean notes. We got notes on Spotify that I chose not to publish saying, less standard, please. So Stan's new side hobby of playing standard, nope.
I think they mean fewer standards.
Fewer standards from us. Fewer broadcast standards, so swearing is in, is what you're saying.
Cursing.
Yeah, cursing is back.
Maybe our last episode, we'll just have to do like the red band version.
Sure.
Whereas, okay. Things you don't need injunction against. Here's my transition into the heavy play ad read. Card gaming accessories brand improves your gameplay and your game day. I was just talking to somebody, so I'll turn this into a story ad, okay? I was up in Cheyenne, Wyoming this weekend, and some really good game stores in Cheyenne.
I did not know that you could drive to Cheyenne from your home.
Oh yeah, it's like maybe 240 to like Cheyenne. It's pretty close over the border from Colorado.
That's like Indianapolis from Chicago-esque.
Yeah, which is also the capital of Indiana, I believe, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's the Motor City as well as
Motor City, as we all know.
Yeah.
So I was in Cheyenne. They did not have heavy play stuff on the shelves. And I was like, hey, do you all know about heavy play? And I spread the good word of heavy play. The owner was like, yeah, we carry the curved sleeves, but not the deck boxes, play mats, dice boxes that feature enhanced ergonomics, mobility, and protection. It's weird that he knows kind of the promotional copy.
The ABC?
Yeah, the ABCs. So the owner, I believe, was like, yeah, I'm going to contact my distributor, try to get this stuff in. Because it features the EquipMag system, he told me, allows my gaming attendees to magnetically attach their deck and dice boxes, create custom deck bundles, carry all their gaming gear in a single hand, and I would love to provide this product option to them. So if you are at Game Masters, shout out to Game Masters in Cheyenne, Wyoming, they might be at your LGS, or you can definitely get them at heavyplay.com using our code, the DiveDown2024, for 10% off that first order. Okay, this week's show, y'all. We are going to talk about bands. We have bands in Pioneer. We have bands in Modern. We have bands in other formats that we will not talk about. But these are the important ones to us, and they will shake up both of these formats significantly. So I'm excited to talk to you all about this. There was also some some lack of bands that I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah, very different things.
You don't want to talk about Explorer bands?
Personally, no.
I was joking. They follow the same band list as Pioneer, so it was a bad joke. It's fine.
I mean, I thought it was funny. I was just rolling with it. Or not rolling with it, as the case may be.
Just bringing the momentum of it to a complete screeching halt there.
So, and that's what I do. That's why I'm on this show, to provide this needed perspective of how not to be funny. So we'll talk about these bands. We'll talk about the band announcement. I think it was actually one of the more interesting announcements in quite some time. And we'll talk about the reasons for that in a little bit. But first, we have some housekeeping. This should be fast. We have no new patrons. We have no increased tiers.
And we got a lot of people commenting on Spotify, so thanks for that. Appreciate it.
I particularly liked Figment 572, who called out my heavy play segue. Specifically, Figment 572, you're my new favorite listener. For the week, you win the prize. We do have a Patreon. If you want to join the Patreon, if you want to help keep us going, if you want to support what we're doing here, you can go to patreon.com/thedivedown, all one word. And even just $1 a week is helpful. It gets you immediate access to the Discord community, which is always enjoyable. Basically, one of like 2 Discords I actually hang out in. If you do not want to do the weekly thing, you can go to our store, thedivedown.com/store. Get yourself some t-shirts, hats, fanny packs, things like that. If you don't want to do either of those things, but you do want to play Magic online and you want to rent cards, you can use our Mana Traders code, which is the divedown_4F7. I don't expect you to remember that. It'll be in the show notes. That goes to the middle of September. And our friends at NRG give our listeners 8% off their order with the code DIVE8.
Did we get a comment from Meow Guy in the last episode?
Oh, yeah.
I need to know.
Yes.
We got like a quack.
Oh, God. They're
We have
evolving.
quacks, screeches. We have woofs, meows. It's a lot. There's a lot of animals.
It is a lot. Yeah, everyone keeps leaning into this. And I'm like, I'm not going to tell people to stop commenting, but
Well, okay. So here's a new shtick, right? We tell everybody at the beginning of the show to make a new sound in the comments, and we can see who actually paid attention. So what's the sound of the week?
What does a fox say?
No, that's the sound of 2012 or something.
Yes, exactly. All right, my friends. We have bands, and more bands. In fact, we have 4 total bands across 2 formats, 2 in each, to be fully frank with you. So, we have this long period of anticipation, right? The scheduled B&R is finally here.
Yeah, and people were thinking there might be something that might happen on the last one, and then nothing really happened on the last one. And then in this one, everybody was like, okay, something's going to happen because things are popping off. There's been meta shares out of whack all over the place. People complaining about unfun play experiences. It's all coming to a head. So here we are, 3 weeks after Bloomborough or whatever. The ban list is posted. Everybody's treating it pretty much as what you call a fait accompli, that things will be banned. But I have to say, when I opened that article this morning, I was still surprised by how many things happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the thing that I'm most interested in is, and what we saw already today from the discourse, is this what people were hoping for? And I think that's something that we'll talk about. You audience probably know this already, but let's pretend you do not, as we are recording on Monday. So not only do we have bans, we have changes on how bans will be working in the future. So I think that will be interesting to discuss a bit as well.
Let's save that for the end.
Yeah, exactly. We'll get this appetizer out of the way of Pioneer, because I think it's pretty safe to say that none of us, besides maybe Doomwake, have been paying too much attention to Pioneer lately, because MH3 still feels somewhat fresh. The RCQ season is modern, and so we haven't really been talking that much about Pioneer or playing that much Pioneer, besides maybe Doom on stream. But in Pioneer, we have Amalia, Benavides, Aguera, and Sorin, Imperious Bloodlord, being banned.
See ya.
Bye. I'm really glad I built Amalia to never play it in paper, but that being said.
You still have the Abzan mana base, so we talked about this earlier. You can play Greasefang.
Okay.
And still lose to Phoenix, as you pointed out.
Yes. Yes.
Are my Fleecemane Lions still good?
I don't know why you bought those, but...
Well, I bought those when I played Theros Con Standard, I think.
Yeah, there you go. That's when they were good, 2015.
WotC thankfully wrote a decent amount about the thought process behind the elimination of these cards from Pioneer.
Amalia has clearly been annoying the entire time it's existed.
Yes, definitely annoying.
Because of the bizarre game states that came out of it, right? Devin, how much did that impact your... how many times did you have to make somebody's Wild Growth Walker indestructible or whatever so that it kept growing? Did this happen to you or no?
It did happen a couple of times. I think less so the indestructible part, and more so there was a synergy where the red decks who had Monstrous Rage, you could actually, once the Amalia was at 19 power, you could jump it from 19 to 21 and just skip the whole getting to 20 power and blowing up the board. So, and I think a big showcase of this was the Pro Tour. Pro Tour Murders of Karloff Manor, that's where kind of vampires burst onto the scene. But there was a match in the top 8 of the Pro Tour where Seth Manfield and Simon Nielsen played a 7, or No, it wasn't.
Five game match.
I think it was 6.
It wasn't Seth. It was Simon and somebody else, but I thought it was a 7-game match. I think they played a 7-game match, or maybe 5 games, something like that, whatever.
Yeah, something more than 3.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that really kind of opened people's eyes to exactly what this deck is capable of and why there's such a problem with the tournament logistics aspect of it.
Yeah, and Shane, we were watching that match live as it was happening in the hall.
We were, our eyes were a bit wider than normal.
However, that was in February. And so it's been a good 6 months. And why do you think that they finally decided today was the day that Amalia has to go? Is it because of the other ban, or is it just because, hey, we've had enough?
Well, it's weird. Shane brought this up, and there's 2 bans. There's Amalia and there's Sorin Imperious Bloodlord. We'll talk about this after, but you'll notice there's not a 3rd ban, and that's kind of a little scary. But I thought initially that they would want to, like, my initial take on the situation was that these 3 decks, I did a video on this maybe 2 weeks ago. These 3 decks, Amalia, Phoenix, and Vampires, took, I think, a metagame share combined of about 67%. And when you have 3, it's basically a 3-deck format. These are the only 3 decks that you can play. And it just makes a lot of sense from kind of like a diversity standpoint to just have a little bit of a shakeup. And, obviously we'll get into the numbers on Vampires, but as far as Amalia is concerned, the numbers weren't necessarily as big. There was, maybe somewhere between like a 15 to 20% metagame share, closer to the 15 side. But I think a lot of what they referenced here is that tournament logistics where it incentivizes draws, it's too consistent, and, it's weird that they took them this long, but I think it does make sense to me.
Yeah, they specifically mentioned that the Amalia deck was one that they've had their eyes on for a while, and I understand the tension that they mentioned in this next sentence, which is creature-based combo decks are something we believe adds positive texture, I wish Stan was here to hear that, to a format's metagame when reasonable. Unfortunately, this particular version of a creature combo has too many problems, and the problems they sort of delineate are the resiliency, consistency, and effectively the annoyingness of it,
right,
like the draws. And so when you have the combination of the depth of options that like a Coco/Cord deck provide you in a deck like Amalia, when you have the ability to recur cards out of the graveyard with like Return to the Ranks and that one creature whose name is escaping me, that gets stuff back out of the graveyard.
Specialist?
And yes, Extraction Specialist, thank you. And I think, and then just like the Wildgrowth Walker draw options just being kind of like an issue, I think they had the perfect storm to say, this has gone on long enough. It, like you said, since February-ish and before even.
And I suppose the other big factor in all of this is that the regional championship in Washington, D.C. is in about 5 weeks, and it is Pioneer. And so I guess that they took this opportunity as well to try to shake up the metagame before it gets on a large stage, but give people time to try to figure out what decks they're going to take. Now, we'll come back to it a little bit later about what we think the overall impact of the format's going to be, but I suspect the timing is, of course, driven by that too.
Yeah, one other thing I want to kind of point out about Amalia is it not necessarily one that they touched on directly in the article, but one that is sort of maybe not easy to, to kind of grok at first glance, but Amalia really has kind of pushed a lot of creature-based strategies out of the metagame. If you go back and look at, I'm trying to think of a good example, but like spirits, Gruul vehicles, humans, all of these decks that just play a bunch of stuff to the board, if they play to the board and they don't have as much interaction, and that is a recipe for disaster when your opponent is trying to set up a combo that not only gains a bunch of life but also wraths your battlefield. So there is a large number of decks that are just you cannot play these decks in a format where Amalia is such a huge player.
What do you think about the statement that basically they're saying we like creature combo decks but not when they're like Amalia? What was it specifically about the Amalia deck that you think made it particularly egregious? Let's ignore the drawing potential with Wildgrowth Walker. Every creature combo deck is going to be a Cord deck. Every creature, almost any creature combo deck is going to be like a Cord, Coco in the Pioneer power level. and be able to hopefully, piece together a combo by like turn 4, right? I don't think that Amalia was particularly, different in its ability to do that. But was it like, a half turn faster than it should be? Was it, lots of creature combo decks run white? Any number of these decks could run Extraction Specialist or Return to the Ranks to get these pieces back.
It's weird because if you kind of look at the ban list and some of the more recently banned cards like Kethis and Walking Ballista, there was a lot of that too, where those are both creature-based combos. Those I don't remember exactly with Kethis, but Ballista, I know for a fact Heliod Ballista killed you on turn 4. I think Kethis maybe was turn 4. I don't know if it was turn 3. The listeners will maybe tell us, but I think the big issue is, like you mentioned, it is that like basically a full turn faster. If you aren't interacting with the Amalia deck, they can kill you on turn 3, and it happened quite a bit. And we saw with the banning of Geological Appraiser, they really don't want those turn 3 decks. They want to shy away from those as much as possible. I think that might be the single biggest reason is just the speed at which it killed you.
Yeah,
that makes sense. All right, so I mean, me personally, I do enjoy creature combo decks when they exist, but I definitely can see the annoyance that Amalia would cause, and does cause long term. So I'm hoping that something can be salvaged from this concept. Like I do like these types of decks to exist in Pioneer. I mean, you can kind of look at like Rakdos Sack as maybe like another option if you want to play like a weird creature combo deck, I suppose, but it's definitely not the same. So I got to figure out if I ever do play Pioneer again, what I'm going to play.
Greasefang?
No, thank you. Okay, but we do also have Sorin Imperious Bloodborne. Bloodborne?
Sure, Bloodborne.
Bloodlord? I've been wanting to play Bloodborne again. I keep crossing my fingers for a 60 FPS remaster, but we'll talk about that on the Offshoot podcast one of these years.
Switch up.
I mean, it's a good platform. So the thought process behind banning Sorin, I mean, is probably pretty obvious to many people, but the metagame share, they specifically mention the metagame share here, okay? Which they believe to be, quote, problematic. And they specifically mention that it was above 30% for the Pioneer RCQ season, and they said, it is clear that the deck's existence is shrinking the diversity of the metagame to a degree we deem unhealthy. So we have this sort of, somewhat arbitrary, I suppose, above 30% being deemed unhealthy. I think we've seen evidence of this in the past with like modern decks sticking above 20+%. So, we have more data points on WotC's thought process about metagame.
Yeah, and I mean, if you compare it specifically to Modern and Nadu, I believe, Nadu at its peak last week was maybe about 25%. And they say 30%, but they actually don't lump in this other category of Rakdos midrange and Goldfish. It's actually closer to about 36%.
Yeah.
So yeah, Sorin definitely had to go.
Yeah, and I think then they chose to ban Sorin rather than like the Vein Ripper or something like that, because just like a card like Sorin is the enabler, right? Like they can't ever do another cool vampire because then Sorin can just cheat it out again. So the discounted cost is just too much of a long-term issue and they don't want to deal with it. So Sorin's gone.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that's the most fascinating about this still to me is like we went into that pro tour in Chicago being like, this Pioneer metagame, I don't know. Like, I don't know if anything really cool is going to happen. And then Channel Fireball created a deck that literally broke the format based on the card that they found in the new set from that pro tour. And, they let it rain for a long time, and getting up to 30% plus metagame share is wild, with very few like changes to the deck happening in the time since. It's just been very good this whole time. Before we move off of this, though, most of this deck, or a large part of this deck, is still going to be playable. Rakdos Midrange was one of the best decks in Pioneer before this, or at least it was a stalwart member of the metagame. And after this, it will be. So unlike what's going to happen to Abzan / Amalia / like all of those cards, like a good amount of the stuff that you're playing in Rakdos is going to be there.
Yeah, I dug through, like Devin mentioned, the Rakdos mid-range section of Goldfish is actually mostly Rakdos vampires. But I did find a few, decks that did evidence what you're saying, Dave, right? Which is like, it's still the Blood Tithe Harvester, Bone Crusher Giant, Graveyard Trespasser thing. But there are new additions like Hostile Investigator, Magda the Horde Master, Caustic Bronco that are, adding to this deck's power level, I suppose. And, the core is still there. You still have the removal, you still have the hand interaction, you still have Fable of the Mirror Breaker, not banned. So it's still a core, like you said, that I think people will be playing again. How good it is remains to be seen. But I don't think we've seen a lot of development in Pioneer generally, like since vampires came onto the scene. So effectively, it might be kind of where it was, which is like, tier 1, tier 2-ish, and be just fine.
Yeah, and another thing that I want to bring up, Dave brought up a very good point of how, Rakdos midrange used to be the dominant deck of Pioneer, and there was a lot of give and take back when Rakdos midrange was popular between that and the Phoenix matchup. And one thing that we'll talk about in just a minute of, the absence or the lack thereof of what is present on the ban list. If Phoenix is going to be this completely dominant force in the metagame, I really think that you can kind of sort of tune your Rakdos midrange deck to at least give you a fighting chance. Because back, before the Rakdos deck had something access to like Sorin and Vein Ripper, they were playing main deck Graveyard Trespasser. You can play main deck Unlicensed Nurse. You can play Go Blank in the sideboard. Like there is a lot of flexibility in this Rakdos deck now that you're not required to start your deck with 4 Sorin, 4 Vein Ripper, and kind of go from there. So those flex spots can sort of be aimed and targeted a little bit towards the expected metagame, which I think is we'll see how it shakes out.
But now that means it's time to talk about the things that were not banned.
Yeah, because Phoenix was mentioned.
Yes, Phoenix mentioned.
Phoenix mentioned.
So they said, we considered other cards as well. Treasure Cruise and Fable of the Mirror Breaker were discussed at length. Our team decided that while each of the following formats clearly needs a change, we wanted to take an approach that would allow us to make the most important changes necessary to each format without possibly going too far. So basically they're saying we played it safe. And Treasure Cruise, Fable of the Mirror Breaker, cards that people are probably slightly tired of seeing are still in the format, which means that Phoenix, which is still a tier 1 deck, as far as I'm aware, still has one of the best pieces of card draw ever printed.
Yeah, I don't know what they're doing. I'm gonna be completely honest with you. I don't really know what's happening with I mentioned earlier how the 3 best decks in the format, Phoenix, Amalia, Vampires, they took up roughly about 65% of the metagame. Phoenix still was roughly around, I think it was 16 to 17%. It was really close to Amalia in terms of metagame share, and I just don't really understand what they expect if they're taking this huge portion out of the metagame with Vampires and Amalia, and where they expect all of that metagame share to go with a deck that is already this dominant. And one last thing I want to mention is they've talked so many times about the Treasure Cruise, how they want to keep Treasure Cruise a part of the format. I don't really know how long that's going to last. I mean, it's just going to get to a boiling over point, and I feel like we might already be there.
They love it.
Yep.
They just love Izzet decks.
Yes,
they think Izzet decks are good and should be around.
I mean, to be fair, Stan, we love them too, Stan.
I know. And they represent our needs and wants.
It's a perfect time for Stan to come back, because that's what I was going to say, is like, because it's an Izzet deck, and Izzet mages like Dave and Stan demand to be satiated.
I think I'm a recovering Izzet mage,
their
frankly.
Incessant need for card draw.
You have switched a little bit.
I have. But it's like, it reminds me a little bit of when they did some modern BNR and talked about how it's when they unbanned Ponder. And they're like, we wanted to give Murktide some support because it went down to 49%. And it's like, we can't let the blue-red deck ever be bad anymore, I guess. I don't know why. Like, Delver was a problem in Legacy. Like, they banned Phoenix out of Modern ostensibly. But they just wanted to exist somewhere, and this is what we get to benefit from.
I just think they're too scared to do too much right now. Like, I take what they said at face value, which is like, okay, we're nuking 2 decks from space. One of them goes back to being a non-combo mid-range deck. The other one is dead. Like, I could see them being like, we can't get rid of all 3 top decks. Can we right now? Can we? And also,
you can, though.
Yeah. I mean, but then you get into like, okay, we're going to ban Treasure Cruise, and we're going to unban Expressive Iteration, and then also does Fable also have to go? Like, so I don't know. I mean, Fable has been weird for a long time, right? It's banned in Standard. Not that matters anymore now that Neon has rotated finally. But like, it was. We talked one of the first shows that you were on, Devin. We talked about a Pro Tour Philadelphia, and we were like, the best deck in the format the best card in the format is Fable the Mirror Breaker, and that's probably continued to be true, even though it's it's the best card in the sense that is one of the most useful cards in the format. But I don't know. At this point, it's like, do we need to get rid of it? I guess we'll see if there is anything that really abuses it, or if Rakdos is just too good, they can take another piece out of Rakdos by getting rid of Fable. But I do agree on the Treasure Cruise side. Like, I love being able to cast Treasure Cruise in a format on the rare occasions where I play Pioneer. But like, it's good. Drawing 3 cards is good. And
it's really good.
It's only going to get better. Like, that's the type of card that only gets better as time goes on. So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the issue, right? It's just so I think their big philosophy when they first introduced Pioneer as a format, they wanted it to be where like kind of this bastion for all these standard staples of back in the day, and they want you to play with their standard cards. And part of the joke was they would ban the fetch lands but let you play with the delve cards. And I think at that time there wasn't a high enough density of 1-mana cantrips. If you look at, back when Pioneer was introduced as the format, there was no Consider, there was no Sleight of Hand, there was no Picklock Prankster. And I think as you design more sets and as more and more cards get introduced, it just gets to a certain point where even sans fetch lands, these decks are just the thing that baffles me about Phoenix is how it just doesn't ever have to mulligan. Maybe Stan, if you can attest to this, where your hand is 3 cantrips, 3 lands and whatever, then all of your hands do the same thing. You know what I mean? You never have to mulligan with the deck, and that's because of the fact that you have this incredibly high density of cantrips, and your deck just does the same thing every single time, but it does it at an incredibly alarming consistency.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably a fair point, that they were just scared to overdo it, and like hitting Treasure Cruise, you'd basically just be like hard targeting the top 3 decks in the format and making like a statement like, we just want a brand new metagame entirely. And maybe they don't want to like put that much weight on the scale, I guess. It is surprising though, because I also do feel like on one hand, Phoenix is always ebbing and flowing as the potential best deck in Pioneer, and until like something takes over. In the past, it was mono green or Karn shenanigans. I guess Karn was a mono green card, but like it would be the best deck. Something would take over. They would ban something else. Phoenix would come back, and we just keep going in and out of that cycle. So maybe Phoenix is the power level cap. Like maybe they have like a mechanism for evaluating power level, and Treasure Cruise is just as high up as they want to go.
Okay. Anything else you all want to say about Pioneer? Like, I think it's hard to measure the impact of this for me, at least. Like, I actually tried to like go on like MTG decks rather. And I was like, what are the worst matchups against these decks? Like, see what maybe is like going to rise a little bit. But MTG decks effectively like immediately scrubbed these decks that have banned cards in them from their matrices.
Oh no.
So they just don't exist. And I even like scrolled through their Twitter to find like, they screen cap the matrices. They had nothing in Pioneer back until April. So I was just out of luck and like finding any data about like Pioneer win rate stuff. But I mean, besides Phoenix still being darn good, any thoughts here?
I mean, I think some people are thinking that mono green is going to come back. Big Nykthos decks. So maybe that's
what is mono green? Is mono green just like playing gigantic crazy beaters? Like if they don't have like the Karn stuff,
that's exactly
just a ramp deck.
Yep.
Yeah, they're playing the what's the name of the haster that flips? I think it's Ulvenwald something.
Ulvenwald Oddity.
Yeah, that thing. So basically what they do is they use Outcast or Trailblazer and Cure to draw a bunch of cards, and then eventually get to like have a bunch of stuff in the battlefield, and then get to Oddity, flip, and all of your stuff has haste and just attack you.
It has haste and trample and gets +1/+1. every creature you have.
Ooh, that sounds interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just a big ramp deck. So I do think people are kind of on that. I think that when I look at this, of course, when I think of Pioneer, the thing I always go is like, "Ooh, will Spirits be good? Will Spirits be good?" But
Spirits is good.
Yeah. Hopefully it's better.
I'm trying to think of like a big winner from my side of things, and I am interested in trying both Gruul Boats and Rakdos Sacrifice, and I think that they both had very polarizing matchups against Amalia and Sorin. It was, Boats had really struggled against Amalia, and then Sacrifice, good luck playing that deck against the Vein Ripper. So I think that both of those have a little bit of room to grow, but again, both of those don't have the best Phoenix matchup, so you kind of have to address that in different ways, maybe build the deck a little bit differently, more aggressively, but I think I would be looking at those two decks, and like Shane said, I think Monogreed as well is poised to rise.
What about Blue-Black Snake, Devin? Can we finally have can Snake finally have some time in the sun?
I'm going to put Snake in the Rakdos Sacrifice deck.
There you go. Okay. Makes sense.
Is this finally time when you teach me how to play Raksack, Devin?
I feel like you've been asking me for a year at this
yes.
point.
I mean, yes, exactly. It's finally time.
Tune into the stream tomorrow. I'll be playing it.
Okay. Sweet.
All right. So that's it for Pioneer. RC's coming up. At least it'll be a somewhat fresh format for the RC, which I think is cool.
I'm playing Phoenix. But.
Devin, you're going. I was going to say you're going to the RC, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're planning on playing Phoenix.
Oh, I'm locking it in right now.
You're locking it in now.
Yeah. There's no reason to test anything else.
It's October 6th.
I know.
Stan said, "Is it in December?" It's October 5th. Stan.
It's on my calendar. I've got tickets.
Doesn't Duskmorn come out before that?
Yeah. So.
Devin saying it's not going to knock Phoenix off the top. He's saying I'm locking in.
What
Phoenix.
about mice? What about Boros mice, Devin?
Mice hate Phoenixes.
It's a good standard deck, but
yeah.
Simic frogs.
It's not standard.
Okay,
Rakdos
modern.
Lizards?
My friends.
Oh,
Modern? Can we
talk about changes?
Can we talk about our format?
Can I read it? And can I read
these?
Please
do. Yes.
Nadu Winged Wisdom is banned.
Good riddance.
And then here's the line.
Rated R.
Rated R. And then this is the line that surprised me. I will say it did surprise me. Grief is banned.
Yeah.
Also
Joy
surprised me.
is in. Grief is out. You know what I'm saying? Now, Nadu. There's so much to talk about with Nadu and so little to talk about with Nadu at the same time.
I think before we even get into like Nadu specifically, I do want to talk about what they mentioned about the timing of this particular announcement.
Okay.
Because what they said, because everyone was like, well, why did you do this now? Right. And what they said.
And by why did you do this now? The implicit question is, why did you not do this earlier?
Exactly.
Right.
Why not earlier? Right. Yeah. And so they said the timing of the previous BNR announcement was poor. We believe it is important that players know when to expect changes to formats. As such, we thought it was important to stay committed to the announcement dates we promised. The date leading up to the week of the Modern Pro Tour in Amsterdam was simply too early and would have served us all better to wait to being a few weeks after that event instead. This caused the last month and a half of Modern to be fairly stagnant. Players knew we were likely to ban Nadu on the next opportunity, but they also knew that the best chance to win an event was likely by playing with Nadu. It was a poor experience for players, stores, and tournament organizers. So the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I think it's a pretty rare mea culpa on from WotC, which is just like, look, we don't know if we could have done this better, but we definitely didn't make the last month and a half of Modern very good, and it created a poor experience.
Yeah.
So,
and surely this is the only mea culpa we're going to get during this BNR announcement,
Wrong.
right?
I do want to say, I kind of get where they're coming from, because we have lived in the world where Wizards had no ascribed time or dates or anything to ban lists, right? This is the world that we were in recently. It was like last year and the year before. I mean, there's been many different ban list strategies in Wizards over the years. But like saying we think that it's important players to know when to expect changes to formats, actually I think is a true statement And it's like a philosophical thing that I think they shifted to in the last year that I think they probably need to keep because of what terrible effects that had on Standard over the last couple of years. If you don't forget, like there were tons of things that were banned in Standard at different points in times that people were upset about. And I think that they attribute that to the majorly waning interest in Standard as a format overall because it felt unstable. And like you weren't going to get to play with your cards, like as soon as you bought them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you know, there's a lot to be said for sort of blindly following systems that you've put in place, even though you see that the output is going badly. Like, should you let a catastrophic failure continue just to stick with the schedule? I'm not sure that I fully agree with that, but I do see why they decided to stick with it.
Yeah, it's at least something you can appreciate. You know, it's even if you don't necessarily agree with it from a business standpoint, it's like, you know, they don't want to lose confidence in the players, their ability to sort of follow the cadence. So like Dave said, I can at least appreciate it, even though it did feel kind of crappy. I get it.
I love that you mentioned confidence, Devin, and I think this should be a theme that we discuss several times this episode about whether the announcement or the decisions are improving or possibly hurting our confidence as players and consumers. Because I'm not sure personally. Like I'm still on the fence across the board.
I think that was a concern of Michael Majors, who basically wrote a separate article all about why Nadu is banned, and then provided some interesting historical context about kind of like how cards, specifically Nadu, is like designed, tested, and considered during development. And so I think that's definitely what we want to be referencing here.
Or not. Considered or not play tested, depending on how things go. I mean, look, the first sentence of that article from Michael Majors is Nadu was a design mistake.
Yeah.
Like, and that I think was kind of apparent to people, right? As we got further into this, is that something happened. You know, people love saying that things are design mistakes when they think they're too broken, right? We said that about Urza's Saga when it came out. It was never confirmed in that case. It's been confirmed about other cards over the years. You know, there's some indication that like Hogak was a design mistake, really, and that it was a card similar to Nadu that was targeted at Commander that someone was messing around with, trying to do splashy effects with. They didn't get a chance to test it because they were changing things late in the set development, and then boom, something bad happened. I mean, there's Skull Clamp that also is literally a design mistake as well, and a few other ones as well.
GT.
What's that weird like vessel, like water vessel? You know what I'm talking about? Like the gourd of transfiguration. What am I talking about? It's like magic bottle. You know what I'm talking about?
What are you talking about?
I'm just gonna find this, but
you're not trying to talk about Memory Jar, are you?
Yeah, sure.
No.
That was like a famously messed up card.
That was a famously messed up card. I don't think that one was a design mistake in the same way that these ones are literally cards that were not tested. Right. Okay. And that's what this is. Like this really, like, you know, Michael wrote an article saying I messed up.
My bad, guys.
Yeah. I mean, I do appreciate that transparency again. You know, you were talking about confidence a minute ago, Stan. I do think it was 100% on their mind. Like this is some PR playbook stuff going on here where, you know, it's like an apology. It's all of those type of things like coming out here. We're going to tell you how we're changing the process. We're going to tell you what went wrong, like all of these things.
Yeah, I think it's potentially interesting to talk about how this card was originally designed and talk about why that didn't work and then why they changed it. Because it was a 1 green-blue 3/4 flying bird wizard. Weird. You may cast permanent spells as though they had flash, and whenever a permanent you control becomes a target of a spell or ability, an opponent controls, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, put it into your hand.
That card's cool.
Still annoying, but not crazy.
Yeah, it's and I think that's kind of what specifically Majors sort of says is kind of like this is a card we thought would be like an interesting role player. It'd be part of like blue-green decks probably, but not busted. And what he speaks to that I found interesting was the Horizon set specifically basically hire groups of contractors that do sprints of testing. And then after those sprints, there were there were a series of last minute checks of the sets by various groups, aka commander players. This is the normal operating procedure for every release. It is a series of opportunities for folks from various departments and disciplines to weigh in on every component of the project and give final feedback. There was a great deal of concern raised by Nadu's flash granting ability for commander play. After removing the ability, it wasn't clear the card would have an audience or a home, something that's important for every card we make. Ultimately, my intention was to create a build-around aimed at commander play, which resulted in the final text.
Can I mention part of what this is all about? Mm-hmm. Do you know the card Prophet of Krufix?
Yes. And that definitely looks like a Prophet of Krufix to me.
Yes. So Prophet of Krufix is banned in Commander, and it says you may cast creature cards as though they had flash, and then the other ability that Prophet has is untap all creatures and lands you control during each other player's untap step. So it's got a whole other thing going on, but it was actually, I think, both of those things that made it very good in Commander. So it's not as powerful, but I can definitely see why Commander players would be like, oh, this flash thing, I don't know. I don't know, team.
Well, aren't there other cards that have that text and ability?
I'll take a look real quick, but I'm sure there is. I just wonder if they cost more and are easier to interact with. But
yeah, I mean, and this one also does kind of like the card draw if your stuff gets targeted stuff. So maybe just considered a little bit too powerful as a whole piece, right? Like both with the the Sanctuary, that green card, that the enchantment that gives you a card draw when your stuff gets targeted.
Shapers, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks. So what I think is interesting is then after that I read earlier, Michael says, I do want to go over I want to go over some talking points and learnings, but before I do, I'll emphasize that despite the failings in process, ultimately the card was my responsibility as a lead designer of the set. So again, a mea culpa. Doesn't necessarily say, I will be, trying to do better going forward. Although he does talk about, and I want to talk about this with you all, about some of the things that they say they want to do in the future during playtesting that I think are pretty cool. But all in all, it's basically like, yeah, we messed up. People came in at the last minute, as they always will do, and other people chimed in, said this wasn't necessarily safe or good for one format, and it got changed and it messed up another one. And that just sort of speaks to, I think, the competing priorities that aren't necessarily in play at all times for a set that's going to be Legacy, that's going to be Commander, and Modern Legal, right?
Yeah, see, that I don't know if this is something that we want to get into on this particular episode or even this podcast in general, but do you guys even think that commander aspect of everything, where they have like a panel of commander players that they like ask and kind of have them proofread the designs and all that stuff for a set? Now, I guess it kind of comes down to like, is the set designed for Modern specifically, and Modern and only Modern, which I understand that it's not, but is it one of those situations where if this set is going to be played at like the highest competitive level, like Modern Pro Tours and things like that, is this a set that you want to kind of just not have those commander specific designs in them and maybe have that in a separate product like an MH3 Commander or something like that, and maybe keep those two, like, don't put the peanut butter with the jelly, to keep them separate for a little bit?
What's wrong with Goober Grape, Devin?
What's wrong with Uncrustables, dog?
True.
I mean, when you say that, Devin, it sort of makes me think, like, this is a set called Modern Horizons. Mm-hmm. Let's make it modern focused and ban it out of Commander if it's too bad.
But then they can't sell the packs for $10.
Okay, well, here's the thing. This is a rare. If this was being printed at Mythic and is designed to be, I mean, I'm sure they have a little bit of bean counting, and they go through and say, well, which of these Mythics are maybe Commander focused? Which of these Mythics are Modern focused? I could say I'm 90% certain something like that happens, right? And like, this is just like a random rare, right? So it's like, I think it's safe for the financials of the set to be like, if this rare gets banned out of Commander, it's not going to impact the majority of the people buying it for their Commander staples. This would be my assumption.
I think there's one other rather large problem with what you guys are talking about right now, is that they don't know.
Yeah,
like they design things.
They don't test the cards.
They try, but it's the classic thing of like there's 100 people involved in making these sets, and as soon as they get out into the wild, there's I don't know,
millions.
10 million, Magic players, more probably, I don't know, a lot. And so that implies that they have a way of perfectly knowing which is supposed to be what. And I don't think that's achievable.
I mean, I think what this also kind of confirms for us is that, to use Shane's term, the bean counting algorithm, they've determined that they can sell a $10 booster pack to a specific class or classes of players. And the way they can sell $10 booster packs is by targeting modern players because they have a more expensive buy-in. They're predisposed to that and they expect that. And commander players because they're just buying the one card probably on the secondary market. And the limited pull and the standard and pioneer applications, I think, like they don't have to worry about that as much because they're like the packs probably sell less well than standard priced packs. And when you have this situation where you're like trying to target two classes of play,
no way is that true, Stan. I'm sorry. There's these sets are all the best selling sets that Magic has ever had. Lord of the Rings was, Modern Horizons 2 was, 3 probably will
there's
be.
There's a difference. I think there's a difference between revenue and packs sold.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It's like when a Christopher Nolan movie comes out on IMAX and makes like, or Avatar movies come out on IMAX and they make billions of dollars because IMAX tickets cost $30.
Right. So what you're saying is that you think it's potentially possible that more packs are moved of the standard sets, but because it's a 2-to-1 ratio in cost, that makes up for it essentially.
That's the problem, yes. And I think that like because they're trying to appease two very distinct classes of players, they don't always prioritize like one over the other clearly. And I think like what we see here in Major's article is effectively that. Like we weren't even thinking this was going to be a modern card, even though it was modern legal, because this set also has to appeal to commander players because they're the other class of people who are going to care about these pieces of cardboard. And it's like, if they're going to make these cards not available to commander players, they just can't sell them for $10. And then if they can't sell these cards for $10, they're just not going to make as much money in the summer when these sets come out.
And they just won't make the sets.
And then they just won't make the sets. Yeah. And we need these sets. Like Devin, your, whatever it's called, anti-modern tournament has proven to us like 3 or 4 times now, like if we don't have Modern Horizons, Lord of the Rings cards, like the format will
Wild West.
look the same for like 5 years straight, and
yeah,
like we need the churn, but it's like an impossible needle to thread.
The only thing that kind of gets me is, so you mentioned that the packs are being sort of designed and curated towards both modern and commander players, but I guess my caveat would be, there's an MH3 commander product, right? So if you run into a situation like this where, okay, so you're towards the end of design and maybe this is like, okay, we can't do this in the modern set. Maybe if you have to switch the design to like, a commander only, maybe if like, I don't exactly know what the design process is, but maybe in a situation like that, you take that card and you're like, okay, we're going to slot this into the commander deck and we're going to swap that out with one of those cards and tune some numbers here. I'm not a designer. I don't know how easy that process is. Maybe they can't do it, but
so I can speculate a little bit about how some of this might work vaguely, not being familiar with card design, but being familiar with like printing processes. I think that there's a chance that, and they've talked about stuff like this in the past occasionally when they're like, well, we have this card with this piece of art that was on the sheet and we didn't like the text for the card. So we changed the card right before it went on press. Like, I think that there's a chance that kind of stuff is going on, even to the point where they might be like, well, we have a card it has this eagle from Amonkhet on it, or this bird from Amonkhet on it, and it costs generic blue-green, And we can change the power and toughness. We can change the type line. We can change the text in the box. But we can't change any of the stuff that's going to make us have to re-rip the 4-color plates for this. Now, that doesn't totally make sense. But I feel like there's some aspect of the process that becomes like, oh, we have to fill a box with a design. And the constraints of the design are a little different than what we think they are to us when you say something like that. Oh, just swap in a different card. I don't know.
It's probably not that easy.
It might not be quite that easy. And it might be even stranger, the box that he's trying to work in, than we can anticipate.
I mean, fundamentally for me, it's like I understand a lot of the tensions that they are feeling. And it's just another good and I think prominent example of the types of things that can happen with a last minute change. And that definitely has been something we've seen in the past where, a last minute change causes an issue that was unexpected.
But this is something that could be instructive for, I think, many of us in our jobs. Like this is just the type of stuff that happens, Shane, like you said, when you make a last minute change and don't have a chance to think through all the ramifications of what you're doing, or a last minute ad or whatever. Like the thing that fascinated me the most about this article from Michael, honestly, was the part where he's talking about, we're walking a tightrope of risk with this set. I was really focused on Ugin's Labyrinth and Chthonian Nightmare. And then there's a whole paragraph in here about how they had to change Amped Raptor so it couldn't be cascaded. It wasn't like a cascade-like thing where people are cascading into Glimpse of Tomorrow, like all of these like things. And sometimes when you're spending so much time focusing on those things, you miss like the new thing that you've just messed up that goes in there. And so, there's like 300 cards in these sets.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's going to happen.
I think we should perhaps talk exactly why they stated that the card was banned. And maybe 10 minutes ago at this point, you mentioned, I think it was Dave, I'm just going to call you out, David, that, it's stuff that can be missed, right? It's a last minute change. They didn't identify like the combo aspect, but, there's millions of players who get their hands on it immediately and figure stuff out. And so Michael directly references that, saying that, players quickly identified the combo and figured out how to basically handle any situation through these endurance loops. The Spring Heart and Tuco loops basically, give you infinite mana. You can fight through any situation, interaction, battlefield sweepers, things like that. But I think going back to the Amalia example, he stated that, this loop also required demonstrating a complicated series of game actions with a high number of permanents. Changing zones resulted in extremely long turns. So much like kind of Amalia causing just situational issues, we saw this in the NRG event this weekend with like BBD's 45-minute turn. Just the deck itself, in quotes, is a logistical nightmare.
How much Nadu do we think was at NRG, Devin? Like, I know that we were just glancing at the results. Do we have a guesstimate of what that metagame was? Melee
is kind of weird. They don't really give you the deck breakdown information, but I was going through all of the deck list and I tried doing some napkin math, and I think it was about 26%.
That doesn't
on
sound
Saturday
like
at least. That
doesn't sound like napkin math, Devin. 26, not 25%. You're not going to give me 25.
It was 26, but I might have missed one, is what I meant to say. I mean, I was just scrolling through and I was counting in my head. But that was for Saturday. I don't know what the team event was.
Yeah. Team event definitely had it on some of the teams in the top 8. As I was flipping through, I noticed. I mean, Andrew Ellenbogen was on it, I know for sure, but
it seems like an Ellenbogen deck.
Sure. Famously a person who likes to play good decks because he's a good player.
Weird. Okay, people were also maybe thinking maybe they'll just remove Shuko or Outrider and Core or something like that. And Michael says that this wouldn't solve the logistical problem that Nadu presents. Even it could leverage Lightning Greaves or similar cards, and that would be problematic for the long-term enjoyment of tournaments. And since it threatens to monopolize people's time, all while not being a fun or easy deck to interact with, there isn't a compelling argument to preserve the deck. I think that's a strong statement.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite moments of how annoying this deck was to play against in various ways in paper was the one time I played against it in paper at a tournament. The player that I was playing against had a template that said how many times each one of their creatures had been targeted. in a turn. So it was like 0, 1, and 2, and they were just moving their creatures through the template to like help us track it, which I thought was very thoughtful of them to do. But it was funny that you needed like this extra piece of gear to really be able to track the game state effectively, and that is not what we want.
Yeah, that's
you know
wild.
what that kind of reminds me of? Do you guys remember when Legacy, the White Plume Adventure, the dungeon mechanic, how they had this giant oversized card for the dungeon?
Yeah.
That's what it reminds me of.
Yeah.
And then going back to what I was sort of previously referencing earlier about how Michael states they're going to try to get better at this going forward. Because I think kind of, we can look back and say, remember all the fun we had with Nadu. How do we not have this happen again? And he gave 2 points that he wants to focus on. And it says, 1, at a high level, we want to make sure that all relevant groups have time to impact change in a time window that makes sense of the project. So basically, can we get people looking at stuff earlier? Let's set better deadlines. Going back to kind of your work example, David, right? Which is like, when are we signing off on this and when does it go to press? Do we have a long enough time between sign off and print? And that's, exactly what it is for WotC, right? Is they have to send this stuff to the printer, it has to be on some plates.
Right.
What do our deadlines make sense right now? If this is happening, maybe they don't. And he even says, I have faith that if the current Nadu had been scrutinized while our contractors were actively playtesting, things would have turned out better. So basically, contractors went home, weren't actively playtesting anymore after these changes happened.
Right.
We can't have this happen. And then 2, I'll be putting more effort towards being conservative if I can't draw clear conclusions, as well as encouraging that behavior in others. This is a very interesting statement to me that I want to digest with you all in a second. I didn't know that Shuko was powerful with Nadu. However, I was aware that I didn't fully understand the implications of Nadu's text box. That should have urged me to more aggressively seek other opinions, and failing any strong conclusions to default to something I better understood. I was blinded by a goal. Make something that's really awesome for somebody. And ultimately nobody was happy. Again, I think these are strong statements, and the one that I find the most interesting is basically, let's be more conservative.
Well, I think it's within a certain scenario, though. Like, because I think that they know that they don't want to be more conservative, especially with these products that they really want to have make changes. But what he's saying here is, I didn't have a clear conclusion of how good this text box was, and I knew it when I submitted the card.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, he was like, I was under time. Basically, this reads to me like, I was under time pressure. I tried to make something cool based off of something that was close to something that we had already and knew a little bit about, but we didn't know enough about the decision that I made for it to be a final decision. Mm-hmm. That's how I read that. So I think he means being more conservative in moments like that, where they don't have access to
err on the side of caution, effectively.
Their full tool set. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what it is, though. Like, when you're making stuff, at the beginning, do crazy stuff all you want, but at the end, like, there's ramifications for everything that you do. So I don't know.
It's so hard, though. Like, so there was, believe it or not, there were some tweets directed at WotC staff, and
were they nice?
Someone,
I would assume no.
You be the judge. It's not my job to infer tone in a tweet. And some people called out like this particular excerpt from the article and asked, like, how could you do this? How could you let this happen? Blah, 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 blah. And Forsyth replied that 99% of the time this happens, no one notices, no one cares, it has no impact.
Yeah.
And I think the exceptions are like loud and they feel dramatic and format defining, but this happens all the time. And it's probably because like these people are generally good at their jobs and like they have good instincts and they probably know like when misunderstanding a card file could or could not be a problem, and here it was missed for whatever reasons that Majors has or can't admit. Like they can't not do this sometimes, and I think the alternative is maybe even worse on some level, where it's like they don't take these risks because they have to, and they like play things too safely, and then you have an unimpactful $10 booster pack, and like then everyone loses too. So it's hard. It's hard. Like the outcome is good. The way we got to this outcome, like clearly we wish it was a little bit more efficient, but maybe they'll get the right lessons from this mistake.
I think the combination of these two statements kind of work hand in hand, right? Like, it's not just we're going to be more conservative when we don't know. It's we're going to try to make our schedule better. That will make us make fewer mistakes like this in the first place. And then if we're still uncertain, let's try to err a little bit more cautious, right? And I think what Dave said earlier makes sense, which is like, take all the shots you want if you have the proper testing in place to make stuff like this happen less frequently. And look, it's not like this happens all the time, right? Like, we have two big examples from the Horizon sets that are, truly messed up, I'd say, in Hogak and Nadu. But besides that, even stuff people that were saying was like busted as heck, didn't end up being all that bad.
What's the third one, Devin? Devin, you flashed up a 3 when Shane said 2. What's the third one we're forgetting?
The one that's on this ban list.
Grief is not as bad as Nadu or Hogak.
It's
I would
close.
say
Hands down.
It's close.
I don't think it is, buddy.
It's third, but like.
So you want to get into grief then? Let's do it. I think you've exhausted.
Can I say one last thing really quickly about this?
Yeah.
I think that what you said, Stan, about how like we don't notice, or what Aaron said, we don't notice that this, 99 times that this happens. These people are I think Magic is the best game.
And the best it's ever been.
I'm just going to say, because these people are good at stretching the boundaries of what the construction of the rules can do. And they screw things up. It's like you said, it's an unimpactful $10 pack is probably a worse alternative. And a less interesting, less like creative Magic is also a worse alternative than kind of having this happen every once in a while, I think, for what it's worth. Not to try to be like, I love Wizards of the Coast or whatever, because they make plenty of annoying mistakes, but I do think they're good creatives. And I think that's like the thing that really drives this. And sometimes you just miss.
Yeah, the last thing I just want to mention real quick about this whole discussion about the booster packs is you have to kind of realize the whole philosophy behind Horizons in a general sense, where, if we were discussing at length throughout preview season, and we all kind of assume like the modern format as we know it prior to MH2 is not going to exist. And the only way you get to that point is by pushing those boundaries. Like, you can't release, there's a reason that these sets exist, and that's because modern doesn't have the churn that it needs if it's just going through the standard products. And, it's for every banger design like Ragavan or Urza Saga, all these awesome designs, there's gonna be a couple bad eggs, and you just kind of have to take the good with the bad.
Was Grief a bad egg?
Yes.
You know what's crazy? For ages, I was banging that hammer that like Grief has gone too far. This is the least fun experience. Like, turn 1 Grief Scam is the least fun experience in Modern. Like, get it out of here. With Scam being effectively absent from the metagame since MH3 especially, I haven't felt that Grief problem as much. So I was very surprised to see it on the list. And I wasn't even really convinced by their reasoning, but I also I can't be mad because like Grief sucked for so long that like you can't be mad that it's gone. The timing of it just feels so odd.
I think they must have been worried it was going to have a resurgence when they banned Nadu, is the only thing I can think of as far as the timing goes.
I mean, even if you go back to, I can't remember exactly, but like the metagame prior to MH3, I don't think there was a lot of Scam, right? I can't remember what the best deck was at that time, but I don't think there was a lot of Scam at that time.
Yeah, Scam just fell steadily after Fury's banning, which seems, so long ago at this point. But so I think, Stan, it's funny you said, this is not fun. It's like, one of the first lines in the Grief banning component was like, Grief was like the least fun part of modern competitive events. Was like, you're already mulliganing, you're getting double griefed, unfun. And while it's blah blah blah, while it's not seeing as much play as it was in the past, it's still a format staple used by several decks: Necro Dominance, Esper Gorios, Living End, Rakdos Midrange, handful of other decks, blah blah blah. Right. In the interest of making the format more fun, we are banning Grief today. That's it. This is just a not fun. We'll get rid of it.
What is fun?
I liked scamming people a lot. I love killing a couple of merfolk and then having a 4/4 fury. You know, like who's to say?
Well, you're a psychopath.
I've always said this.
Secretly.
Here's my problem. Here's my problem with this banning. Remember how when we were talking about the meta the past few weeks, and I'm like, the only decks that aren't MH3 focused are Living End, Esper Goryo's Vengeance. That's 2 of the decks on this list.
Yes.
This format is going to be effectively all MH3, unless like Yawgmoth makes some kind of comeback.
Well, the One Ring is not an MH3, so.
Yeah.
Shane, I feel like you and I are wearing the same tinfoil hat. It's like they just kind of want us to forget the strongest cards from MH2 by banning them. By the way, if I may, really, really quick, I just did a search of modern challenges in May of this year because MH3 dropped in June. Mm-hmm. Modern Challenge May 31st, most popular deck is Living End, followed by Rakdos Scam. Same weekend, different challenge, most popular deck is Rakdos Scam.
Well, those are both grief
challenge
decks.
In May, Scam and Yawgmoth. Well, but my point is like Scam was good before MH3.
Okay, yeah.
So I think like maybe Dave's theory that they were afraid of a resurgence, like maybe that holds water.
And I almost wonder if maybe not necessarily like a scam resurgence, but a lot of people, so obviously the talk on Twitter and the chatter over the past, basically a month or so at this point was what's going to be the best deck when they ban Nadu. It's not if, it's when. And I think a lot of people's initial responses, mine included, this was before, energy kind of took off, was the mono black deck. And this was like right after the Pro Tour. There were 2 copies in the top 8. The deck looked really, really good. It looked pretty dominant. And what happened to that deck? Where did it go? I don't really know if it's like did that deck have a Nadu problem? I don't remember. Like I played a little bit against the Nadu deck with the mono black deck, but it didn't feel completely unwinnable. I don't know if it was maybe a part of the energy deck having 2 aggressive starts and maybe you just don't have time to pay life for Necro and Ring and all that stuff. But yeah, I don't know. And maybe this is like a preemptive like, oh, well, we assume the best deck is going to be mono black, so we want to take at least a little bit of a preemptive action. I guess the one thing I will say is, part of this whole, in the interest of making the format more fun, Stan's got some griefs over there. Who defines fun? And the other thing is, there's a card that we'll maybe talk about in a little bit that maybe has some unfun play patterns itself. It almost feels like they could have used the same. Like it almost feels like they could have used that same sentence for the next card.
Who's to say they won't?
Well,
in a short amount of time. Listen, yeah. I will say, I think that having discard happen to you is one of the most. It's objectively one of the least fun things in Magic. Like just hands down. And that's said as someone who loves to cast a Hymn to Turok, really enjoyed griefing people, whatever.
You're just big anti-fun.
This is why every time Shane plays tournament practice, he adds the comment, no discard, no counter spells, no burn spells, no planeswalkers.
No Ulamog. Can't forget no Ulamog.
I mean, I think what you're saying, Dave, is exactly on what my mental wavelength was as well, right? It's like grief removes agency. And I think that WotC doesn't want that level of agency removal to perhaps be in the format in terms of a fun factor. We're going back to the fun factor argument, right? And I think that they want people to be able to feel like if they're keeping a 5, that they still have a chance. And then if they get, turn 1 grief scammed or something like that, then they definitely don't. And then they will instantly concede, right, Stan, to protect their hand information.
Yeah.
As they should.
It's just the timing is very random, but I do think this probably makes sense in the long term. It also puts a rather large dent in the side of the format. However, I don't know if anybody at this point in time thought that mono black was going to be the best deck, even with all the early vibes that we had for that, because of how well energy has been doing in this metagame. And I don't think that that's likely to change. I think part of maybe what happened why mono black is maybe not as popular as it was before is because we figured out how to Arena of Glory flage people. And that wasn't quite as present earlier. in the Modern Horizons 3 format. And so maybe we should talk about what's left, and then we can talk about what we think is going to happen. But should we talk about the One Ring?
I think we have to.
I was convinced.
People are mad.
I was convinced that this card was going to be banned today. I
Same.
really thought
they're not allowed to. They're someone is telling them they can't.
It's
or
me.
shouldn't. It's the Tolkien estate.
I don't think so. I don't think so. What do they care? They don't care at this point. All the packs are sold. There's nothing on store shelves anymore. There's no, like the money the Tolkien's or whatever the licensee gets out of this is already paid.
Already.
They had the whole Post Malone PR stunt. Like everything's done.
Yeah.
So what did they say? So while present in several decks, there is no clear The One Ring deck terrorizing Modern. That could be good and bad, depending on how you look at it.
It's sort of true, but yeah, but it's because it's in so many decks.
Being a unique combination of self-protection and card advantage, it is a strong card that helps prop up several varied strategies. I think that's actually a really good reason why they might not want to ban it. Ultimately, we decided not to act against the One Ring. The possible problems it may be causing for Modern just aren't as clear as Nadu and Grief. Once we see how the format evolves after this change, we will continue to observe and evaluate, blah, 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 right? Is that a rational explanation, right? Because I think you could look at it two different ways, right? Which is just like, yeah, there's no The One Ring deck. There are like 6 The One Ring decks, for better or worse.
I think A, yes. I think B, this is similar. In my mind, this is similar to why they didn't ban Treasure Cruise. It's just, we're not going to take a shot at so many different things that are popular in their format. At the same time, we get to do this every quarter if we want to. Let's see what happens.
I think that's perfectly strong, right? I think something that I think the One Ring does is it allows a number of decks to exist in the current format. Because how do you keep up with a deck like Boros Energy or similar types of strategies that if you aren't dropping a One Ring on turn 4, then you're dead. Like I think it allows decks like Eldrazi, it allows decks like Control to get the needed card advantage back and buy themselves a bit of a turn. Like, it's not quite a time walk, but it's not too far off. So I think it's just like, I'm not going to say it's a necessary evil because look, I'm not like a One Ring truther. Like, I don't think it's like a card that needs to exist, but I think that it might be a card that needs to exist right now if they want to have a diverse metagame. We can't test that without banning it.
Without making Devin host a tournament for us. But
Modern without the ring.
Like, I don't know. I just feel like if they got... So first of all, as you pointed out, like a lot of the text that they use for Grief could be copy pasta for the One Ring. Like your opponent casting the One Ring against you, it doesn't make you think like, ooh, this is fun, interesting counterplay that I have to work around. You just kind of like groan and you have to wait. Do you feel that way
for like of any hate card though? Do you know what I mean? Let's just like, you could bounce a One Ring, you could exile a One Ring, like you could make them sacrifice a One Ring. It's I think like every piece of hate that exists in Modern.
Who's bouncing One Rings? Why would you bounce
it?
You don't want to do that.
I'm saying like let's say it's like an EE or something like that, or like a Chalice, right? Like you're not going to bounce the One Ring, but like in terms of the counterplay to the One Ring is, while not exactly the same, I think still exists, right? And it's like not a lights out card necessarily. I think it's like, it's a card that like an aggressive deck doesn't want to see.
I guess my point is that, I mean, EE, Chalice, like these other Damping Sphere, these other colorless hate cards that are very popular, mostly post board, sometimes main board. I think they are more interesting because they don't like completely shut off the game for a turn. Like maybe they'll actually shut off the game for multiple turns, but then you kind of have to be creative about what you're doing to address them. Whereas with the One Ring, sometimes you can never be creative enough because they play the One Ring, they draw a couple cards, they play another One Ring, and then it turns into a turbo fog game and it stretches the game out in a way where I think you again are losing a ton of agency as a result.
Yeah, I mean, I do think I agree with Shane that the counterplay is better. Counterspells are more effective against the One Ring. You can you can use damage can't be prevented style effects to be able to get through the fog. So if you're an aggressive deck, you can go ahead and just keep attacking in that case if you have your your giant and all that kind of stuff. I do think that the pattern that you described, Stan, is something that is likely to be included in more and more decks at very little cost. And that's the bigger problem I have with this, is not the unfunness. It's the fact that I don't really think there's a great reason that decks don't play the One Ring.
I got a $500 reason for you, buddy.
Well, yeah, but that doesn't, in our world, that doesn't count.
Look, I mean, I think realistically, the cascading nature of like One Rings into One Rings like can happen if like the deck has a certain level of card draw, but like just drawing, like, let's say you draw 3 cards off your One Ring or even more than that, right? Like the odds of you getting another one of your 4 of is like not particularly that high to replace it. You're taking damage during your upkeep. Like playing a One Ring against, again, I'll just go back to like the Boros Energy example, is not particularly, lights out. It's just like it's giving you a chance to then draw into, maybe like an All Is Dust or a Sweeper or something like that. And again, that just sort of gets back to like my original contention, which is just like, I think that the One Ring just allows more decks to exist, because otherwise, like some of the power level of the, MH3 powered decks perhaps is just like so strong right now. And I don't know where we go with that, right? It's like, I don't know if, I'm not going to say WotC's painted themselves into a corner, but I think right now, like the reason that so many decks are running the One Ring is because it gives them a chance. But there is, I think the downside of the One Ring is legitimate. Like the life loss does add up if you don't get that answer. And it's happened to me, right? Where it's like, it's not just a free turbo fog.
Yeah, I think the big issue for me, so I mean, there's a couple of things about the card that I'm not a huge fan of. So first and foremost, it seems like when you put this card on the stack and when it's on the battlefield, it almost seems like everything that happened in the parts leading up to that turn almost feel like they don't matter anymore. Where now the game is essentially like there's sort of this game inside the game where it's you play the first 3 turns. There's maybe I have this. Maybe that's not the best way to put it, but like maybe I can kill my opponent before they get to their turn 4, and then once turn 4 happens, now we're playing a different game. Now it's like you need to really just kind of focus all of your efforts and direct your attention towards like this new specific game piece. I mean, I think the big issue for me is its ubiquity, right? I went and I mean, this is just some kind of like, random goldfish stats, but and I don't know what the time frame they use on this, but as of right now, the most played card in Modern is the One Ring. It's in close to 50% of decks. And I don't know, it's just, you mentioned the counterplay, and I think that stuff is good, like getting people to play Bone Crusher Giant, Questing Beast, these kind of like damage can't be prevented cards. I know that I've seen some people play Sunspine Lynx, which is the 5/4 cat. So there's some cool counterplay to it, but I don't know. It just seems like the ubiquity, the play patterns of, and I think the most egregious part to me is the fact that you can just chain them. And there are some decks that, that are even trying to like have 6 in play to cast the ring from my graveyard to loop this new ring and keep the new one. And I think that aspect of it is kind of just like the play patterns, and we talked about fun being subjective. I think that, like you said, I don't know where we go from here. Like the more people that put this card into their deck, like when does it end?
That's what I think. When I started seeing it show up in Energy,
I
was like, oh, okay. Like, okay. Are we going to have,
what's next?
Living It 420 with 4 One Rings and burn? Like we had that's I think that's the real thing that's going to consign this thing to the ban list eventually. Like if this card was 3 generic and a black instead of 4 generic, like we wouldn't be having the same conversation. But I think because it's just 4 generic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll go on record. Like I do think this card will be banned. I don't know when, because it will be such a seismic shakeup to, I think, how a lot of decks are just able to function right now. Like I honestly don't think a deck like Eldrazi Tron would be very good without access to the One Ring. And should Eldrazi Tron just exist because, it's for benevolence? But
the thing is, though, if 50% of decks are running it, we don't really know what's good or not good without the One Ring.
That's a good point.
There's a chance that Eldrazi Tron could be the best deck in the format without that. We don't know, because it's in half the decks. There's no way to test it. As we said, we need Devin to run a tournament for us. But it's getting to a point where it'll just be a totally different format without it. And I think that time will be here someday, maybe around Christmas,
And you brought up a good point earlier. I think it was Shane who brought it up where, the One Ring is one of the best cards at kind of keeping the Boros Energy deck in check, but we've kind of already seen that adaptation, as Dave mentioned, where, it was sort of like week 1, Boros Energy, if you want to beat it, you play the Ring, and now week 2 is, oh, well, they're just playing the Ring, so now what are you supposed to do about it? And it's just going to keep happening to every single deck. It's like, oh, Goryo's Vengeance, or, loses to the Ring, what if they add Ring? And it's just, this is going to keep happening. It's just, it's a cycle.
And what's it going to do to player and consumer confidence when they ban the Ring after it becomes so ubiquitous without a reprint and just forking over $100 per card?
Well, they did. So I don't know if you guys caught this article. What was it, last week or the week before, where they specifically, it was the State of Design article from Morrow, and they specifically called out Bowmaster and the One Ring as being power level outliers, and they explicitly called out the fact that they could reprint them out of whatever their terminology they use, but they basically said, TLDR, we have the capability of reprinting these. So, and that specifically, that statement right there kind of caught everybody's eye. They're like, whoa, people thought they couldn't reprint them, but now that they can, does that change the longevity of the card?
Not when it's in 50% of decks.
Yeah.
Yeah. What good is that capability if it's gone by Christmas?
Oh, because it'll be in Commander forever.
Well, no. I'm saying they wait to reprint it to drive the price down and then ban it.
Yeah, we have certainly seen that pattern before.
Now that would be joke. That would be awful, but I mean,
I think that the card will still be worth some money because of Commander. Because it can go in every Commander deck too, and maybe someday Commander will ban it as well. Although this is the type of card that I don't think, maybe it would get banned in Commander, but they're so reluctant to ban things in that format that I don't know.
Well, it's also a cool one of, right? Because then you can't chain them. A lot of people have had the discussion of what if they restricted it, and obviously that, for logistical reasons that can't happen. We can't have restricted cards and whatever. But it would be a cool one of. That's the flavor of it,
Right.
So maybe to put a cap on this conversation, overall, I don't know about you guys, but I realized I caught myself I probably sounded a little pessimistic about all this. I'm kind of optimistic about what the format's going to look like moving forward. This is a welcome change overall. Nadu being gone, I think, is a net positive. Grief being gone was surprising, but can't really complain about it. And I'm curious to see what's going to come of this. I think RCQs are going to be more fun. Mm-hmm. This weekend will probably be dominated by energy, but the next month or two, we could see a lot of evolution in the format, and maybe this is what MH3 needed to have its time in the sun.
Yeah, I'm very hopeful that a bunch of stuff is going to pop up, come back, or be discovered from MH3 a bit more than it has so far, or be taken more seriously, I suppose. There are lots of people out there playing lots of different MH3 decks. I think that it'll just have a chance to shine now, and that's what it says in the article. And I was like, I think it's true.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to bring up here is sort of, now you don't have to maybe dedicate as many sideboard slots to specific decks, where if you expect a decline in Goryo's, you can skimp on Graveyard Hate. You don't have to play your Nadu sideboard cards, and maybe that opens up sideboard slots for attacking energy, which that is certainly the deck to beat, moving at least Stan said in the next couple of weeks, probably.
Yeah.
Dave, you brought up the next banning.
Mm-hmm.
Let's quickly talk about the changes to the B&R cadence that were mentioned in this article as well. And basically, they kind of reiterated that the goal in their current schedule, make sure that each set has proper context for evaluating new cards, provide fewer points when decks would change, but this didn't take into account the timing of competitive play seasons like RCs, RCQs, and the Pro Tour. And so that led to this issue that we're currently facing, which this change is happening in the middle of the competitive season, or like even potentially in the week of the Pro Tour, like the previous ban announcement would have caused. So what they're doing is they're aligning the B&R announcements to the RC and RCQ seasons, which they say will allow them to make adjustments to the play environments to ensure the best experience possible for the competitive play pipeline. So they want to use the RC and RCQ season to gather data, observe the evolution of how each format absorbs each new release, which should mean fewer B&R announcements overall. And the next one is on December 16th, 2024. So what, 4 months? In September, October, yeah, 4 months. That seems smart, I suppose.
So notably, does not cover standard. Right, standard is still on the once a year.
They still want to do
track.
this. Yeah, they still want to do as few standard bannings as possible.
I think that what this says to me is this is a full recognition that non-standard formats, Legacy, Modern, Pioneer, those are for enfranchised competitive players. And what they're doing is they're aligning the ban schedule to the moments that matter most in that calendar, whether those are people who actually are those grinders or people who are fans of the formats, more like participants and observers in the format, sort of in the way that I am in some ways. It's all more logical to go along with that kind of competitive vibe. And I think that makes sense. And I don't know if there's a lot more to say about it than that. I mean, I guess that means there's basically only 3, ban windows a year or something like that. But it seems fine to me.
Yeah, I'll be very interested to see, because you brought up standard, and I think that's a very good point to bring up, because for those of you who don't know, the next RCQ season after the one that we're currently in is standard, which that's going to start in the beginning of January. So at least the way that I looked at this is because, like, say they want to attach a specific ban announcement and they want to focus on, like, okay, so if we have standard RSQ season coming up, we want to take a look at this ban window to see if standard's okay. So I almost wonder if like you mentioned, that standard ban window, it's like once a year. I wonder if that once a year will switch to whatever the standard RC or RCQ season is to align with that specific season. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But yeah, I mean, I can't say enough good things about this. I think this is, like, weirdly enough, I think this might be the most important thing on this whole announcement, everything we talked about today, because we won't have a situation like we did the last time if they're going to commit to assigning the bans to the RSQ season.
I'm excited to see how this change impacts things. Hopefully, people are more satisfied with the path forward. I think it just makes sense. So fine with it.
This is one that I feel like, to echo Stan from a minute ago, I mostly feel optimistic about most of the stuff in here. There's a lot of information and a lot of things that people feel are missing from here and maybe should have done, but I think the things they did do were good. And I'm curious to see what will happen. And it makes me want to hop back in the queues myself, which I think is everybody's goal, right?
Mm-hmm. Last thing I'll say, Treasure Cruise draws 3 cards, One Ring draws 3 cards. Just saying.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm saying, but I'm just saying.
Maybe drawing 3 cards is actually good.
Who knew?
Might be.
And that wraps up this week's show. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to our podcast so you get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. And if you use Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave us a rating and review. If you'd like to submit a question to the podcast or just reach out in general, you can tweet us at The Dive Down, all one word, or email thedivedown@gmail.com. If you'd like to support our show, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/thedivedown, or check out our web store at thedivedown.com/store. Head over to heavyplay.com to get some incredible deck and dice boxes and playmats featuring the Equip Mag system. Use promo code THEDIVEDOWN2024 to get 10% off your first order at Heavy Play. Also, shout out to Mana Traders for sponsoring the Dive Down. Sign up for Mana Traders using promo code the Dive Down _4F7, all one word, to get 10% off your first 2 months of renting Magic Online cards and save some money on paper cards from our friends at Nerd Rage Gaming with code DIVE8 to get 8% off your order at NRG. As always, special thanks to the bands Nowhere and Spaceblood for letting us use their music. And until next week, get out there and re-break modern.